Fantastic creatures. They have the power to shake heaven and earth. These majestic creatures bring with them great wonders and terrible mysteries, leaving behind them traces in history. And they don't feel guilty at all about killing smaller animals. They're just following their instincts and the necessities of life. Yet are noble beings who show boundless mercy to the earth. However, already 100 years ago, the previous king, Tiger Colossus, had tried to create such fantastic creatures en masse. And in the end it led to the death of many such creatures, and the result was almost no result. Their terrible claws and teeth, like blades of death, knew no mercy. And also to the fact that some of them have renounced their status as divine beings. It is only in the present day that there is the only one of the fantastic beings left on earth, and he is Lionel Milliard. The children who lived with him in the village were delighted. They kept asking if he could really turn into a tiger. Lionel would then narcissistically reply that they knew who he was, and didn't understand why they were asking such an obvious question. The children answered him that of course they knew who he was, the last fantastic creature on earth. Then one of the boys asked if he could show him how he was turning into this tiger. But Lionel only laughed and said it was his secret weapon. Then he stroked the boy's head. He also added that he would show it to them after 100 nights of sleep. The girl who worked at the place where the guy was now thought that he must be very popular, for there were many people crowded in front of him. One of the girls enthusiastically turned to her friend and said that he was just magnificently handsome. This girl's name was Amelia, and she was just as she was addressing the girl who worked at the place. Her name was Hannah. Amelia was a cheerful girl with pink hair, and she said that Amireya looked like an old pumpkin compared to the greatest Lionel. But Hannah, the one who carried the dirty dishes and had brown hair, said it was just rude to say that. Amelia was indignant and said that neither Amireya nor Lionel was her boyfriend, so it was okay. But then suddenly Hannah said that then she probably wouldn't be interested in the rumors she had heard. The girl was immediately surprised and asked what the other rumors were. Hannah then said that someone had said that Amireya had bought a bag of flowers this morning to ask a girl out. But then she said that Amelia had promised to help Aunt Ridgebed in the stable this evening. The girl remembered at once that was why and was upset. But then Hannah said she would do it instead. However, tomorrow so will do whatever she says. Amelia got excited and said that she was just the best. The girl laughed and went on to do her work, and Amelia had no way of knowing what she should wear for this date. Then Hannah walked into the room where the woman was already sitting and said that even here it was noisy, and apparently Hannah really likes Amelia. The girl said that this video was really cute. However, the woman, pouring a new bowl of soup, said that one way or another she should take the dish to that handsome guest. Hannah said that of course she would, and afterwards she went out into the hall and brought a plate to Lionel. The guy, upon seeing her, playfully asked, "Does she really work at this place?" Hannah was really not expecting this kind of question, and didn't know what to say to him about it. But Lionel was not going to wait. He handed the girl a coin and asked if he could ask her one question. Hannah put it in her pocket and told him to ask anyway. There are no guests at this time, so she has a few minutes. The guy smiled and said he really liked her. Then he added that he was looking for someone to go traveling with for 2 months. The guy also said it would be great if he was unexpected and with a good background, so he knows how to keep promises. At this point, the girl thought he sounded so cocky, as if it would be so easy to find. After that, she asked if he needed someone from the neighborhood. He could, after all, just bring someone he wouldn't mind trusting. The guy didn't answer anything at this point. He winked at her and held out his hand. The girl decided that she didn't need to answer him better. Then Hannah pulled back the coin and tossed it into his hands, saying she would pay him back. She couldn't agree to something she wasn't 100% sure about. Then the guy playfully asked her what she had, because she had free time. The girl said not at all. She was a little busy. Lionel laughed and said that she had told him that there were no guests at that time, so there was nothing to keep her busy. Hannah was surprised and asked if she had said that. Then the boy laughed even more and said that if she was lying, she should change her facial expression so that it would not be noticeable. Hannah looked at him at that moment and noticed that he was much more handsome when he laughed. But she looked away and said that she would refuse his offer. Lionel sighed and said that it was a pity after all. But the girl, before she left, wished him to find a good man. And so, after some time of her work, the girl was already finishing up sweeping up the stables behind her partner, Amelia. After collecting another pile, the girl stopped to catch her breath and noticed that it had already gone dark. Suddenly, the horse came closer to the girl. Hannah petted it. The horse's name was Dorothea, and the girl said it was very nice to be clean. But then suddenly the horses became very worried. They galloped in their seats and roared loudly. The girl was very surprised. She did not understand why suddenly all the horses began to behave like that, and the animals continued to gallop restlessly in their enclosures. And at that moment the horse, who was very worried, got out of his enclosure and ran. Hannah was very frightened, for Dorothea knocked her down, and there was nothing the girl could do, for horses gallop very fast. The girl sat a little longer, and after that went in search of her horse. She shouted its name all the time. Hannah realized that if she couldn't find her, this was going to end very badly. But then suddenly she heard someone growling, and when she looked forward, she saw bright yellow eyes. The girl immediately froze with fear because this animal started to approach her and she noticed that it was a tiger. The girl continued to just sit and watch. Then the tiger just turned around and started walking away. Hannah, seeing this, immediately exhaled. She suddenly remembered that it could be Lionel, in which case she had absolutely nothing to fear. The girl reflected that if the tiger was of such enormous size, it was definitely Lionel. And at that moment Hannah, in a muffled voice deep in the forest, spoke his name, but no one answered her. The girl was shocked. After all, when she had seen him during the day, the guy had been human. She wondered if he had turned into a tiger because it was more comfortable for him to be in animal form. But as she turned around, she saw different clothes strewn about, and she realized it was most likely the one Lionel had worn. Hannah remembered that he had told the children that the tiger was a secret weapon, but she did not understand why he needed it now. The girl realized that something irreparable had happened. The girl, startled by all this information, immediately screamed louder, turning to Lionel and asking what had happened. Then her hand accidentally started to approach a locket that was lying not far from her, and the girl decided that she would go to it and seek it out. And at that moment, her hand began to move closer and closer to this locket. Then the tiger growled, telling her not to touch it. Hannah couldn't make out what he said, so she asked again. But at that moment her hand accidentally touched the locket. At that moment, a bright light poured out of the locket. The girl immediately looked there, because she had never seen such a thing before. And at that moment, some sort of chain of bright blue color began to appear across her brush, and a collar appeared around the neck of that very same tiger. And then suddenly there was a heavy clinking of metal. Their chains began to wrap around them. The girl didn't realize what was happening, but when she looked up, she saw a man standing over her with a collar chained to it. It was Lionel. Its collar chains glowed a bright color, and his eyes glittered with anger. After finally realizing a little of what had happened, Hannah laughed none and said that she must have made a very big mistake. The guy finally got to his feet, and rubbing his head because of the hard blow, said that right. That's not what he wanted. Hannah then tried to touch the chain that surrounded her arm, but said she couldn't even do that. Lionel replied that they would talk about it a little later, and that first he might as well get dressed. Then he asked the girl to hand him some clothes. After that, the guy explained that what she touched was an ancient magic item that was created by the royal family. It was meant to catch fantasy creatures, and with this medallion, it was much easier to find them. Hannah was surprised and asked, not understanding why she was involved with this. The fellow, seating himself on the ground, said that she was the second person after him who had touched this rare relic. He had recognized her as his master, and so now they were bound. Lionel added that he had said during the day that he was looking for a man, hadn't he? Originally he had hoped to find someone with whom he could walk together to the place Lightning Rhodium, where all such relics were sealed, in order to break this spell and bring order. Having said that, the boy thought for a moment. Then Hannah didn't feel bad about his act, and she told him to ask someone he was sure he trusted. Lionel let out a muffled chuckle and said that a formal relationship was much better than a casual acquaintance. He then added that if things had taken this turn, could he find out her name? The girl said her name was Hannah. Then the guy got down on one knee and said that he was Lionel Milliad, and he was asking Hannah to accompany him to the lightning rhodium. The girl was very surprised and thought about such a proposal. At that moment, the guy thought whether it would be easy to change her mind. Then he said that of course he would provide her with clothing, food, and lodging, and when they sealed the relic, they would return back together, and he would guarantee monetary compensation as well. He absolutely didn't care what she did with his body. The important thing was that Hannah didn't misuse his power. The girl was surprised. She didn't understand what it meant that she could do whatever she wanted with his body. Lionel smiled and explained that now that she had captured him, he could serve her. He was actually quite good at it even. The girl sighed, looking at him with an indifferent look, and said, "Not quite as he said." Afterwards, she said that Aunt Rigibeth's horse had run away and asked if he would help her find it. Then the guy turned somewhere to the side and, closing his eyes, sniffed. And a few seconds later, a pungent scent reached him. So he said the horse wasn't that far away and ran away. Hannah was immediately pleased and said they would talk about the rest as they went along. They needed to find her before the horse ran off even further. But at that moment she looked at her hand and noticed that the chain had begun to disappear. The girl was surprised and wondered if the spell had broken. Lionel moved closer to her and said not at all. She was changing for her own convenience. After a while they continued walking through the woods, and the guy said that honestly, the horse wouldn't like it much if he got any closer. Then Hannah guessed and asked if it was because of him that the horses were acting strange and nervous. The guy said he didn't do it on purpose, they just smelled the beast. And Lionel said that, as she could already notice, the girl could now make him do anything. Hannah wondered how it was that he could do anything. Even if she ordered him to die, he'd just go and die. The guy looked at her playfully and said he didn't even know. After that, he asked if she really wanted to try it. The girl quickly said not at all, she was just curious, so she asked. Lionel said that in that case she should be much more careful with her words from now on. Hannah thanked, and thought to herself that at least he was quick to apologize. That was a plus for her. When she thought about it a little more, the girl said that they would go looking for him the next day. The boy was pleased and said it was good that she had decided quickly. Finally, they came and noticed the horse lying upset on the sidelines. Hannah immediately calmed down when she saw her Dorothea. She immediately ran up to the horse and began to comfort it, telling it that it was very worried. At this moment, Lionel, watching all of this, thought that even when she could do anything she wanted to him, he was glad he only had to look for one horse and didn't have to kill it. They returned home safely afterward, and the next morning, Hannah quickly packed all her things for the trip she had promised. The guy was already waiting for her and asked if there would be no tearful goodbyes. The girl was surprised and said that they would come back anyway, and even if they had to walk to the capital, they wouldn't get there quickly, and the girl wondered if he could stand it. But Lionel is grateful for her help, even though it's a request for help from a stranger. But Hannah, before walking out the door, said you can't put thanks on bread and it wouldn't be fair. The guy laughed at the situation and said that when they reached the capital of LeBlanc, he would be sure to pay her. After that, the boy and the girl set off. As they walked through the forest, Hannah asked him how long he thought it would take them to get there. Lionel said he thought they'd get there in about 2 months, but it still depended on how much the girl could walk each day. The girl looked at him angrily, and afterward transferred the girl, saying that they had less stuff than they thought. Lionel replied that he wanted to hunt animals and asked if she would have meat. The girl simply replied that she would. Well then, Hannah remembered that they hadn't taken equipment to sleep at night, and asked what they were going to do. Lionel nonchalantly replied that there was nothing wrong with that, and he had a ripe idea. Afterward, he looked at her and asked, "There's nothing warmer than tiger fur, is there not?" Hannah was very surprised, and she asked Nusha. Alien asked her if she could skin him and thought maybe he could regenerate somehow. The guy was silent for a while, and then said that he meant he would turn into a tiger, and they would sleep in each other's arms. But in that case, he would try to find a sleeping bag in a neighboring town. They walked along like that, and soon evening came, and the boy and the girl decided to make a little halt to rest. They made a fire and roasted meat there. Lionel thoughtfully asked the girl if her feet hurt, but Hannah replied that it was only the first day, so she was hanging in there. Then he took the meat from the fire, and feeling it, said that it must be ready. Hannah took a piece from him and examined it carefully. After that, the girl sat down next to him and thanked him. saying that now, once she was full, it would be good at all. Then Lionel looked at her and said, and he thought he was going to sit across from her, not next to her. The girl didn't answer anything. She just looked at it and continued chewing her meat, which was very juicy and tasty. She felt a little embarrassed then, but she still asked if he could turn into a tiger now. Lionel smiled and told her to give it a try, commanded him with a relic. But the girl objected and said she didn't want to do that. The guy was surprised and asked why. It was normal. Hannah was silent for a while. Then she looked him straight in the eye and told him that she was not his mistress, so she would not give him orders. After that, the girl took another bite of the meat and said that it was very tasty. And after that, she offered Lionel to taste it too. But the guy at this point reached up with his finger to her face and wiped away the grease that was left there from the meat, saying he was very glad she liked it. Hannah was a little embarrassed, but afterward she smiled and thanked him, then continued her meal. Lionel looked at the girl once more and thought, and realized that he had found a good companion after all. Night. They spent the night in the forest, and when morning came, they set off at once. They had to wade through a river, mountains, and when the sun began to set over the horizon, they finally reached a small village. When they entered the house, the girl immediately collapsed and said she was insanely tired. Lionel, taking off her backpack, said she had done very well that day. He then went to the front door and told her to get some rest, and in the meantime he would go hunting. Hannah sighed heavily and said that since he wasn't taking his spear with him, she assumed he would hunt by turning into a tiger. At which point the guy started to take off his shirt, asking if she was interested. Hannah was very embarrassed. She immediately turned away and asked why he was the one who suddenly started undressing right in front of her. Lionel laughed and asked how he could turn into a tiger with his clothes on. He would tear them all. Well, when he was done, he said he was going, and the door closed. At that moment, Hannah thought that it was really much more logical, because otherwise he would have torn all his clothes. And after some time, when it was getting quite dark, Lionel came into the house and said that he was already back. The girl, who had been lying down and resting all this time, asked if he was a tiger now. The boy growled, then she got up and looked. But eventually she saw the half-naked guy and laughed and said the mistake was out, and Lionel replied that he was still getting dressed. He then tossed aside the wildlife he had caught, and Hannah saw it and said that she liked hare meat. The boy replied that it was wonderful. Then Lionel went on with his business and dressing, while Hannah watched him all the while, thinking that he was very handsome after all. And then when the guy reached for his shirt, you saw the girl glaring at him. He was very surprised and playfully asked if she was admiring him. Hannah laughed. She wasn't so embarrassed anymore, and she replied that he was handsome, so she wanted to get a closer look at him. Hearing this, Lionel asked if she really wanted to get to know each other better. The girl, realizing what she had said, replied that she was stopping already. He then added that she had better not provoke him for her own good. The girl replied that she would be more careful then. Then Lionel put on his shirt and said that he was the one who had to be careful after all, because she wouldn't be able to stop him. Hannah then asked in surprise, what if she ordered him by means of the relic? The boy replied that she could certainly try, but he doesn't know for sure who will win, him or the relic. The girl didn't understand what was happening because last night he had told her to order him around. Lionel explained that the relic is quite powerful because it was made by the royal family, but he doesn't know if it will be enough to contain him. The girl was surprised and asked if it was possible to release the power of a relic just like that. The guy said anything is possible. This thing was created quite some time ago when his friends were still living. Hannah, thinking about it, said that he was probably right after all, and herself pictured this picture of how he had been wanted to be subjugated back in the old days. At this point, the guy looked at the girl and thought that apparently she wasn't even the least bit scared. He decided that this relationship was perfect for moving a relic. Then the two of them went to prepare dinner. The boy said that tomorrow they would have to get up early too, so they should be well prepared. The girl said okay, she would do her best. And at that moment he decided to check something and started to take off his shirt again. Hannah, seeing all this, immediately turned away. Then she heard a rustling noise. Then she asked if he had turned into a tiger. Lionel replied that yes, he was now in Telegra, and the girl asked if she could look at it. And so, when Hannah turned around, she saw a huge tiger right in front of her, looking right at her with its big yellow eyes. The girl just stood there and studied him with her gaze, her mouth even slightly ajar from surprise. Lionel lay down on the floor and asked if she was afraid of him. He was very interested in the girl's reaction, but Hannah suddenly squealed. But it wasn't a squeal of terror, it was a squeal of joy. She said he was so cute. The guy was shocked. He didn't realize how cute she was. He had expected her to be scared. When Hannah started to scrutinize him and said he had very cute paws, asking if he could stroke her on the head with his huge paw. After that, she asked him to show her his pads. When she saw them, she said they were even cuter and asked if he could always travel in tiger form. The girl didn't understand if being so cute was even legal, so she asked if she could pet him. Having done so, the girl said he had a very soft coat, and she wondered what he liked to eat. After moving away from the tiger a bit, the girl said that it was bad for her heart, so she needed to calm down a bit. Lionel told her to either shout for joy or to calm down completely. She was glad, and said that in that case she would shout for joy. Hannah went over to him again and asked if she could touch his ears and tail. When she did, she said they were beautiful. At this point, the guy thought that now she'd be all over him about it and wouldn't stop talking. He sighed heavily, and afterward he wrapped his tail around her waist and began to move her closer to him. And in a second the girl was right next to his torso and started touching his fur, saying that apparently he was even warmer than the fire. The boy was surprised and asked if she wasn't afraid of him at all. Hannah was still impressed and asked if he was going to eat her, but she wouldn't stop touching and crumpling his fur, saying he was so soft, especially the fur on his belly. It was so much nicer than the outside. Then the guy stroked her head with his paw and told her that he was being treated first and foremost as a tiger, not as a divine being. He then laid his head on her paw and said it was the same as if she was touching Lionel's belly in human form. But Hannah moved closer to his fur again and said it sounded a little obscene, and the guy realized at that moment that it was obvious she hadn't thought of it at all. And after some minutes, Lionel was greatly embarrassed. Then he reached out and using magical power, he turned back into a human. And at that moment, Hannah no longer began to lie on the tiger, but on Lionel's human body. Then the boy looked at her and said that he had said it was obscene, hadn't he? But after this awkward situation, the girl just wrapped herself in a blanket and fell asleep. And soon a new morning came at last. Hannah started to wake up and felt something soft against her body. The girl wondered if her blanket had always been like this. But when she finally opened her eyes, she heard the guy's voice asking if she was awake yet. And the girl felt the wool with her hand and realized it wasn't a blanket. Then the boy, seeing that she had finally opened her eyes, wished her good morning. Hannah said good morning to him in return. Lionel sat up then, and the girl noticed that he was much smaller in size. The boy asked if she had slept well. Hannah answered that yes, she had, thanks to him. Then he wagged his tail and said that she was talking about last night, right? That she wanted to touch his tail. Hannah got embarrassed and abruptly said that now she didn't want any more. But then the guy said she couldn't say no to him. After all, they had such a good time last night that he couldn't make her feel comfortable for long. But the girl got up from the floor and taking her things, said she really didn't want to and would rather wash her face first. At this point, Lionel became frustrated and realized that apparently yesterday's warning had worked too well. After the girl had finished all her chores, she made them breakfast, and as she sat down at the table, she said she thought about it after the meal was done. She put the freshly cooked vegetable soup on the table. It gave off a very pleasant aroma that filled the whole room. Then Hannah asked Lionel if he had any vegetables at all. The boy, sitting down at the table next to her, replied that yes, he had ordered soup at the hotel. The girl remembered, but she said he is a tiger after all, so she thought he doesn't eat vegetables. But Lionel, when he sat down at the table, immediately interrupted the girl and said that he thought she still regarded him as a common animal. Hannah didn't say anything, but just looked at him in surprise. But then the boy wished her a pleasant appetite. As they began their meal, Hannah asked if he could ask one indecent question. The boy was surprised, but he was interested, so he told her to ask. Then Hannah, clearing her throat, asked if a child could be born to a human and a fantastic creature. Lionel was shocked when he heard this, but after thinking a bit, he replied that he could because the fantastic creature is related to God, man as well as animal. But afterward he looked at her and asked if she was really interested. Hannah sighed and replied that she was just curious, only scientifically, nothing more. Lionel then said that it was rare, but there were still cases of people marrying fantastical creatures. And despite the difference in life expectancy, such couples were still happy in their own way. But then Hannah got emotional and replied that it was really just a scientific interest, after which she thanked him for giving her the answer. Lionel said he didn't care even if it wasn't a scientific interest. Then he said that he had an unseemly question for her too. When the girl asked, and what kind of guy immediately asked if she had a boyfriend, Hannah was a little surprised to hear that question, but then shook her head and said she didn't have anyone. But Lionel wasn't surprised by this, because he actually thought so. Then Hannah, and then I said all this, that she didn't even expect him to ask her about it. She thought he was interested in gossip or something. Then Lionel looked at her in surprise and said, if it was a surprise to her, he doesn't understand why she would ask if they're having a baby. It's so much more unexpected. These words made Hannah even uncomfortable, and she stammered, saying that she hadn't said any such thing at all. But the guy laughed and said she just didn't say it that bluntly, but implied it nonetheless. But after this conversation, they ate breakfast in silence, and soon packed up and went on their way again. It was dead silent where they passed. Not even the birds could be heard. Hannah could barely stand on her feet, and she was carrying a heavy backpack. Lionel, seeing the expression on her face, asked if she was tired. The girl replied that yes, she thought she was a little. She also added that she has apparently developed blisters that are causing her discomfort. The guy thoughtfully asked if she could walk to the next resting place, but if it was very hard for her, they could rest and then continue on their way. But Hannah stood her ground. She looked sternly ahead. She said not at all. They had a long way to go, and she could not rest. Lionel then said that it was normal to complain, especially if it was hard. But Hannah replied that she couldn't behave like that, because she had decided to go, and she knew what she was agreeing to. Then the guy looked at her facial expression and wondered. He was sure she was about to cry. It felt good to him, as it was comfortable, but he doesn't know if she's okay. After thinking some more, he looked at the girl and said, if she wanted to rest, just let her say so. Don't overwork herself. Hannah said okay. She would definitely tell him, and that's how they went through the evening. But soon the situation became much worse. So they made a small halt near a rocky area. Hannah took off her shoe and said she already thought her calluses had burst when she walked. Lionel said she was even doing very well. Her new shoes were uncomfortable, and he would buy her suitable ones in the next village. He also said the most important thing is to try to keep your toes still, and he will apply a healing herb. And at that moment the boy plucked a leaf that was growing nearby and ate it. Hannah was very surprised by this, and the guy chewed the petal for a while and soon spit it out. The girl couldn't believe it. She thought something magical was going to happen. Lionel asked that she give him her foot. When the girl did, he stuck the sheet to her callus and started pressing hard so that the girl screamed in pain. Then Hannah smiled and said that he was putting grass on her that the tiger had chewed. The boy was indignant and told her not to treat him like a mere animal, but the girl was surprised and asked if his saliva was different. Lionel said it wasn't that at all. He just needed the stickiness. Hannah thought for a moment, and afterward said that she could have just chewed on it too, right? When the boy laughed and said that was right, she wasn't wrong. And soon he said it was done, and the girl looked at him with a judgmental look because he had embarrassed her again. So, when Hannah was about to remove her foot, the guy started massaging it. The girl was surprised and asked what he was doing, but Lionel didn't say anything to her. He continued to massage her legs, and Hannah felt the tension ease and the pain go away. The girl asked him if he had ever thought of opening a massage parlor. The guy replied that he didn't want to, as he had a lot of hired work at the moment. After that he went on about his business, and at this point Hannah had it in her head that he was even giving her a massage. So it was hard enough not to notice the obvious things, namely the fact that he was trying to get close to her as soon as possible, and those words that she could calmly control him also alerted the girl. But she figured they probably wouldn't get any closer unless she gave in to that temptation. So Hannah decided that this act could be seen as payment for her help. Then the girl turned to Lionel and inquired if he really wanted to serve her. The girl was actually thinking of agreeing to this adventure, but still doubted her decision. The guy said he didn't really feel like serving her, but if that's what she wanted, sure. And at that moment, Lionel took her by the leg. The girl immediately shook her off and said that there was no need to do that at all. When the guy was about to say something else to her, the girl replied quickly so they could end it there. He winked at her. Hannah had already started to lie down to sleep then, and thought she should have drawn a line in the relationship from the beginning, and be sure to say that it's just a fee for the long journey, and not to give in to temptation. And so they went to sleep peacefully, and the next morning they set out again. Lionel was the first to speak, and said that relics like his were kept by the elves in the lightning rhodium. Hannah wondered, and asked if only elves could seal it. The guy said not at all, not only them, but only elves can use magic properly. Lionel added that although he really doesn't want it, he trusts Prime Minister Ezekiel Eska to handle the matter. He also said that this relic was a relic of strong magic, so there was no way to do without it. Hannah asked if the relationship between elves and divine beings was not very good, as she had heard it. Lionel said that was right, and it goes back a long time. They had a lot of conflicts with them, because the borders of regions and countries used to be closed. But there's no such thing now. Then the boy smiled and said that it had been so long since he had talked about the old days that it made him feel good. Hannah looked at him and smiled back and said that he was very interesting. So she was even in a better mood. I wondered if he'd told her all this to distract her from the pain in her legs. But I guess he'd gotten too carried away. Then he thought about it and must have realized why she was uncomfortable. And just as he'd suspected, it was because she had no feelings for him. He didn't really like it, because he was used to girls usually having at least a little sympathy for him. But Hannah's most vivid emotion was that joy when he appeared before her in the form of a tiger. It was actually the first time he had ever seen a girl so cold towards him, and it was quite entertaining. Her indifference to him and this situation in general was very fascinating to him. Lionel then turned to Hannah and asked her why she did not have a young man. The girl replied that she didn't know. Then the guy concluded that she just wasn't interested in a relationship. The girl thought about it and said that was not the point. Then Hannah said that she, too, wanted to date someone she would love with all her heart, even though she didn't have as much imagination as Emily. But Lionel replied that if she wanted to date, let her date. Why complicate things? Then he asked if she might have some problem with that. Hannah was very surprised, but didn't show it and just smiled back. They walked on, and the guy wondered why she didn't want to talk about it, but decided it would be better to change the topic of conversation. And he said that just for the record, he's having a really hard time finding a girlfriend too. Hannah was surprised and asked if it was because of the difference in life expectancy. He said yes, it was because of that too. It's hard to know if a person really loves it or if they just want to possess it in order to fix it. Hannah was surprised, and afterwards said that it turns out even the beautiful ones have some problems of their own. Then Lionel said playfully whether she thought him handsome. The girl replied that of course she did, but afterwards she added that he could care less, for he was not her type. And there are much prettier people in the world than him. The guy agreed with her and said that she was correct after all. Hannah said to herself in her head at that moment that she shouldn't comment on it. Hannah then added that, as she said earlier, she has different tastes, but he certainly goes beyond beauty standards. The guy thanked her for the compliment, but the girl was unstoppable now, and she said that if a law were passed that there was one Lionel in every family, there would be peace in the world. Then she exhaled and calmed down a little, telling the guy that she was comfortable with him. Lionel was surprised and asked in what way. The girl said that there was something about being comfortable with him, both silent and talking, and how many times they had talked about immodest topics, but as she wasted time talking, all her strength began to leave her. It's not a bad thing, of course. It was good to have something to talk to him about, but it was exhausting. Lionel said they needed to finish each other off with trivia together, but the girl said she felt as if she had used up even her emotions. The guy said it's no big deal. After all, people get tired of talking very quickly. He wouldn't care even if she didn't listen to him. After all, if she thought about every word he said, she would certainly get tired of it. Then Hannah said that apparently he did not demand understanding from other creatures. Lionel certainly didn't expect to hear such a thing. He was shocked, so he even stopped when the girl walked on. Then Hannah sensed that something was wrong, and turning back, saw her companion standing. She immediately asked what it was that had happened to him. The boy was silent for a while. Then he smiled happily and said that nothing had happened. Well, then the girl realized that exactly Lionel was living in the human world, and being the last divine being on Earth. Lionel Milliard can never be fully understood by anyone, for he is different in people's eyes. A divine being. And the guy in the form of a tiger has lived too long among humans, but he can't fit into their society. Hannah figured she had no right or responsibility to approach his loneliness. But right now she could only minimally support him. Then she said it was just that he just had big muscles. The girl was a little embarrassed about that. But Lionel smiled, looking at her hand that still rested on his shoulder, and said he had eyes to notice it too. Hannah thought that even though it was small comfort, it should still ease his loneliness at least a little. And so they continued their journey after all. After a while, they finally reached the nearest village. Hannah was very excited when she saw the little houses that stood in the distance, for that might mean something. She will finally be able to sleep and get a good night's sleep on a clean and soft bed. She would also take a bath with very warm water. Even the food, which would be prepared by skillful human hands, pleased her. Hannah was glowing with joy, and she told her partner that she could finally sleep in a bed without any insects getting under her clothes. Lionel, of course, laughed at her reaction, but he still didn't understand. If it was so bad, why had she kept silent all this time? So they finally walked into the village itself. They went straight to the hotel, where an elderly woman met them and asked if they needed 2 rooms. She explained that unfortunately it was impossible to do that. After all, they only had 1 left, and asked them to arrange a double room for the 2 of them. At this point, Hannah thought that a double room was like sharing a bed. Lionel had already turned to the girl, saying that she had said her feet hurt, right? So it was okay to stay. But Hannah waved her hand and thought that in high season, when a guy and a girl ask for separate rooms, you have to make sure they end up in the same room. The girl is well aware of this, for it is done so that if all the single rooms are filled, the person who came alone will have to be allocated a double room, which is more expensive. Hannah knew all this very well, for she worked at the hotel back home, but was on vacation at the moment. Then the girl decided that here was the reason for a quick quarrel with Lionel, and sighing heavily, said that she had longed to sleep on a comfortable bed for a very long time. After that, she turned to the guy and said that it was a pity, but apparently they would have to look for another hotel. Then the owner of the place shouted and asked them to stop. She smiled and added that they had a spare room and offered to show it to them. Hannah waved her hands, implying that there was nothing to do. We'd have to see. They then began to climb the stairs, and Lionel spoke first in a concerned voice, asking if she was directly so disgusted by him. He explained that he wanted to use 1 room for safety, and then he added in a whisper that she probably hadn't even thought about it. But the girl laughed awkwardly and asked if there was a man in the world who would dare to lay a finger on Lionel's companion. The guy still remained serious and told her that people were a lot more reckless than she thought. The girl responded by adding that she just didn't like the fact that this situation was deliberately planned, and asked if he probably wanted to avoid misunderstandings with her too. Then the guy, looking away from her, asked if she was afraid to fight, meaning that it was no big deal to her if they slept in the same bed. Hannah was very indignant. She punched him on his backpack with her fist and asked him what the hell he was even talking about. Lionel then stopped and told her to rest and he would go and buy new shoes. The girl, opening the door, thanked him. And before he went, the guy asked if she needed anything else. Hannah, before going inside, said that if it was okay with him, let him look for new clothes too. The guy said okay. Then Hannah went into her room and was about to sort out her things when suddenly someone knocked on her door. The girl was very surprised. She didn't know who it was that came to her, but she said that this person could come in. Just then the door to the room opened and the hotel hostess came in, apologizing for what had happened, saying that she had completely forgotten that they had another room that had just recently been cleaned. Hannah gave a friendly smile and said it was no big deal and she was glad they had a spare room after all. Then the hostess asked if they would like to have dinner at their hotel. They served simply divine chicken. The girl hesitated and said that as soon as her companion returned they would settle the matter and be sure to inform the landlady. The girl was surprised and asked, "Companion? So that means they're traveling together?" Hannah said yes, that's right. Then the hostess laughed and said that she thought they were dating. The girl was surprised and asked if they looked like a couple, but it felt like the woman ignored her question and asked if they still wanted a double room. Hannah didn't like that the woman was getting her own way again. At this time Lionel, who was just now in the store picking out shoes, found some great shoes. He said the shoes were soft and made of good leather, so he asked to have them wrapped. After that, he walked around some more stores and also stopped by the market to buy some food. So after a while, he finally finished shopping and decided he needed to stop by the grocery store and stock up for the next trip. But at that moment, some guy came up to him and yelled at Lionel, asking who she was. Was she his girlfriend? Guy sighed heavily and realized that it had started again. The interest was literally born out of nothing. Guy is only popular because of being a divine being, so he still has to answer such rash and meaningless questions as, for example, so why did he come to town with her? And in fact, he was getting really tired of answering all these stupid requests and questions. He wished he could pay less attention to him. Every time Lionel passed people, they would whisper and ask him for something. He usually sees it all as interest and compliments. Well, Tim is more comfortable talking to Hannah. It's because of the girl's indifference to him. She doesn't ask stupid and unnecessary questions, doesn't look at him with judgmental eyes. And remembering all this, the guy sighed and decided it was time for him to head back. So after doing all the shopping, Lionel headed to the hotel. Soon he opened the door and told Hannah he was back. The guy knocked before doing so, of course. But when no answer was heard, he said he was coming in, and, opening the door, he said he had bought it for her. But Lionel didn't even have time to finish the sentence, because he saw the beautiful Hannah in front of him, who had just come out of the shower and said that he had done a good job. A good job. Then he went farther into the room and said that he had bought clothes as well as shoes. But at that moment he abruptly turned away from the girl. Hannah was surprised and asked, "What is it? Why is he standing there? Let him pass on." The boy sighed heavily. Lionel mentally told himself that he needed to come to his senses. Then he handed her the package and told her he didn't know if she'd like it. But I know Hanu nothing out of the ordinary should happen. But the boy still had various sad and obsessive thoughts. But Hannah happily started opening the packages. She was very curious about what was in there. Then she looked and saw shoes and new shirts and pants. The girl looks at the clothes, said he had very good taste, and apparently he's had a lot of girlfriends. Hannah thought to himself that with his sloping experience in relationships, it was easy enough to pick things out, but then decided it was necessary not to say too much. A little relieved that the girl was having a normal reaction, Lion suggested we go out and eat. Hannah showed him her feet and said that she had just recently applied ointment to them. Then the guy laughed and said that meant he'd have to take her in his arms. The girl was surprised and asked, "What is he talking about?" After that she went to the window and saw a lot of people crowded there. After that the girl said that he was quite popular. Lionel then asked her, "Can she stand their stares? If not, he can take and bring food to the room." Then he stepped closer and asked if she wanted to be in his arms. But Hannah answered nothing. She sat and thought. Then Lion realized that there was probably no option that wouldn't suit her. But then suddenly the girl, after a long silence, held out her hands and said that in that case, he should lift her up. Lionel was shocked. He hadn't expected this. After a while, he went over and lifted the girl up. Afterward, he smiled and said that they were going to get the scoop now. Then Hannah was surprised and asked, "Didn't she tell him?" The girl immediately said that when he was away, the landlady of the hotel came by. She was interested in their relationship. The guy exhaled and said it was his fault. Afterwards apologized because he understands that it's tiring. Hannah was surprised and asked, "So, why is he apologizing? He is. However, the innkeeper is the one who poked into her personal life." Then the boy and the girl came out of their room and said that he was very happy about it. After that, he asked her what she had answered to the landlady. The girl replied that she was just studiously pretending as if she didn't know what she was talking about. She didn't have to answer all of the hostess's questions. Lionel was shocked. Here were her answers, but the girl said it was none of her business. So it's no big deal. But after that, the guy smiled and said it was understandable. Other people's curiosity shouldn't bother them. After that, they went down to the dining room, where they ate well and densely, of course, without the glances and whispers of the people. And so the next day, Hannah was already dressed in her new clothes and shoes, and they set off on their journey. As the girl walked on, or else she thought that the shoes Lion had chosen for her were really very comfortable. He bought her new clothes, and she slept well at the inn. But there was suddenly one problem, and at that moment, Hannah looked at the guy, and he stared back, and the girl realized that he was starting to act strange. He's already looking at her the whole way and licking his lips in a weird way, like he's hungry. But he said he's not hungry. At this point, the girl couldn't take it anymore and asked, "Is there really something on her face?" Lionel didn't even flinch or look away from her, just said that no, she was fine. Then Hannah still didn't understand why he kept looking at her like that. The girl didn't understand why he suddenly started acting like this, as if a person had been switched in an instant. And so, when it was already evening, the guy and the girl made a halt to have dinner. Lionel certainly didn't take his eyes off her, but still they ate their food in complete silence. Han didn't get up from that, even kind of uncomfortable. She can't even eat properly this way, because he doesn't take his eyes off her for a moment. She was really wondering what he had going on that he was staring like that incessantly. She was very uncomfortable with that predatory look from the beast, as the girl looked at the fire and said that the soup was delicious. Lionel said nothing, and then Hannah realized that those were the eyes of a predator looking for its prey, and at that moment she began to fear him for the first time. Then the girl, gathering courage after a while, asked what had happened during their journey. The guy closed his eyes and shook his head, saying nothing was wrong. But Hannah still stood her ground and asked if maybe he was in a bad mood. The girl didn't understand if he didn't notice anything. Lionel then said that no, he was in a normal mood. The girl didn't understand why the hell he was acting like that, but she decided it would be useless to ask, and, handing him the dirty plate, told him that when he had finished, they would go to bed. Hannah said okay. But at that moment she felt soft fur touching her back. The girl turned around and saw Lionel, who had turned into a tiger. She wondered if that was his maximum size. The tiger was really huge, 2 or even 3 times bigger than last time. But the boy said that not at all. He could still get bigger. Hannah wondered then, and realized that if he got any bigger, he might run her over while she slept. Still, she didn't have much of an option. So she lay closer to him and stretched, and said that the sky was clear today, and the stars were very pretty. And so, like prey in the hands of a predator, she tried to sleep. But then suddenly Lionel turned to her. He told her to move closer to him. The girl pretended to be asleep and did not answer him, and herself at that moment thought that he was certainly a divine being, but she was still afraid that he would eat her. So the girl did not even move from her seat, and at that moment, Lionel suddenly took and licked her face with his rough and wet tongue. Hannah was surprised at this behavior, and the boy himself was suddenly very uncomfortable. He said quickly that he shouldn't have done that. Lionel immediately explained that it wasn't him, it was the tiger's temper. Hannah was immediately frightened and ran as far away from him as possible. Hiding behind a tree, the guy's voice came to her, saying that he really didn't mean it. The girl was very angry about the situation. Hannah resentfully went into the woods and said she would not return until after she had washed herself in the river. And at that moment a breeze suddenly came. Then Lionel smelled the tantalizing aroma and licked his lips, thinking that he couldn't stand it any longer. So after a while, when Hannah did find the river and washed up, she came back saying she was already here. Lionel immediately came up to her and told her to gather her things. The girl noticed that he had shrunk a little in size, and she said at once that it would be a little hard to do it now. But the boy looked at her seriously and said that in such a case, special measures would have to be taken. Hannah didn't expect to be in favor of such special measures, but the tiger quickly picked her up and placed her on his back, rushing away. And these mysterious special measures turned out to be just that. Hannah was in shock. She didn't understand what was going on or why he was acting like this. After a while, the tiger finally stopped. Hannah got off his back and tried to come to her senses after everything that had happened. Then the fellow, rising, told her to take his things and find a place in the village to spend the night. He also added that she would find the coins in his briefcase, in his front pocket. Hannah asked in surprise, "What about him? Could it be that someone was chasing him and he would have to go fight now?" But Lionel didn't want to tell her much and just said no. Hannah objected then. She got to her feet and said that if he said that, they should go together. The tiger didn't answer anything to that. He just sighed heavily. And after that, he grabbed the girl's backpack with his teeth. And then he calmly carried her downtown and threw her on the pavement. So the girl hit the pavement. Hannah, coming to her senses, turned around and shouted for Lionel to wait. But the boy didn't listen to her. He just kept walking. The girl who sat in the middle of the street didn't understand if he had really abandoned her, how he could even do that without even explaining anything. Then Hannah realized she had no way out. She found a bed for the night, and as she went up to her room, she thought about the fact that he didn't even have any clothes. She wondered why he would walk around the village in the form of a tiger, and why he would even call her to travel since he planned to disappear without explaining anything. After that, the girl did all her evening chores, and finally found herself in a soft and warm bed. Then Hannah wondered if he might have hurt himself, or if someone might have hurt him. With these thoughts, the girl eventually fell asleep. Then suddenly, not long after she had fallen asleep, Hannah heard some strange rustling, and so when the girl opened one eye, she saw someone sitting next to her bed. Hannah immediately woke up. She asked in surprise, "Is that really him, Lionel?" The guy then said she had great hearing. After all, even the elves don't notice when he quietly sneaks up on them. The girl ignored his compliment and asked him carefully if he was hurt anywhere. Lionel said he hadn't been in a fight. Hannah then asked where he had been. At that moment the boy thought, how could he keep silent when she was already asking directly? But if he told the truth, he hoped very much that she would understand him. And turning to Hannah earnestly, he said that he was not only a divine being, but also an animal. The girl, rubbing her eyes because she had just woken up, said that yes, she knew that. Lionel was somehow uncomfortable. He sighed heavily and said that this was why, unlike humans, he had a strong sexual instinct. Hannah was very surprised to hear this after a few minutes of silence. She asked, meaning, he said, that he couldn't handle his animal instinct. The guy said that sometimes he can definitely beat it, but sometimes the instinct gets stronger and he can't do anything about it. Hearing this, Hannah went back to bed. She sighed in relief and said that meant he wasn't fighting. The girl said she was getting all excited while she was waiting, and then she asked him what he did when it became too hard for him to bear. Lionel was not very comfortable with this conversation, but he said he was just going to the mountains to get some fresh air, or to make love to free girls. Hannah, hearing all this, asked if he liked it. But the boy answered that tigers are one-loving, so not so much. It was hard for the girl to take in all this information. She put her head back on the pillow and drifted into her dreams. Then Lionel went over and covered her with a blanket and apologized for that and wished her sweet dreams. After that, the boy went downstairs to where the bar was. He asked the man for one serving of something nutritious and a meat dish for 5 people. Then the bartender said they were so honored to have him come to their inn again. Apparently, he had enjoyed it so much last time. The guy said in a tired voice that not really, and asked for 3 lunch boxes, and also that they put more fruits and vegetables in there. The man said he would bring the salad drinks first, so let her wait a little while. By then, Hannah was already awake and started to go downstairs. When the girl sat down next to him, Lionel wished her a good morning and told her that he had already ordered everything. The girl thanked him. At that moment, the guy noticed that the old atmosphere that was still there at the beginning of their journey had returned, and he thought she was going to be angry about last night. Then suddenly the girl felt some unpleasant looks on him and said that she had gotten used to him being quite popular, but asked if he thought people were devouring just by their looks. Hannah then moved to a whisper and asked what he had done, but Lionel also explained in a whisper that it was nothing. They were just interested in his intimate life. And at that moment, Hannah heard someone of the men who had been sitting nearby ask in surprise, "Did Lionel really look for this last night?" Another said she was certainly pretty, but not blonde. Most of the girls the guy dated were blonde. Hannah sighed heavily then, and said that apparently they had nothing to do at all. Lionel smiled and apologized for dragging her into these strange rumors and told her to just try to ignore what they said. The girl said in an understanding voice that curiosity was a human trait. The girl said in an understanding voice that curiosity was one of the traits of people. After that she started on her food and said, "So it turns out he likes blondes?" The guy even spilled a little coffee out of surprise. Afterwards, he said it was just a coincidence. After a short silence, Hannah asked him what he would do if they couldn't make it to the village. Lionel noticed that the girl seemed to be getting angry. When he decided that now was the time to use his crowning seduction technique. So the guy turned to her, smiled, and said that he could easily run across the mountains. Besides, she could always apprehend him with the help of a relic. Hannah replied that she didn't want him to see her as just an appetizer after all. His problem had ruined her mood for the day, and frankly, it was embarrassing to even hear such a thing. Lionel apologized for not being able to warn her in advance so that she understood the whole situation, but he promised that it wouldn't happen again. Then Hannah actually wondered with interest if he could fix this instinct of his. He'd said that even if she was very careful, there was no way she could stop him. And the girl also said that she remembered his words that it would be difficult to control him with an ancient relic in such cases. Lionel had said nothing all this time. He just listened to the girl, and then Hannah asked in a serious voice what he would do if he couldn't control himself. Then the guy hesitated and said that he would probably listen to her in such cases and do as she said. The girl was indignant and asked, "Is this all he'll just do what she says? And it's going to work?" The guy, startled by her facial expression, said he wasn't the only one who didn't understand what to do in such a situation. Hannah at this point angrily poked her salad on her fork and said he would have to pay. And afterwards she looked at him with a smile, adding that if he harmed her, he would have to die. Lionel laughed after hearing her words and said that it was even a little funny how she was trying to kill the last divine being on earth. But Hannah indifferently said that it wasn't her problem, that he was in danger of extinction. But the guy replied that he said that because he thought she didn't want money and power, and so he would certainly take full responsibility and marry her. But at that moment a girl ran into the bar and shouted Lionel's name, telling him to marry her. The guy looked at her and said to Hannah, like how she was. The girl moved away from the door, and was already starting to walk closer to the guy. She had a determined look in her eyes. Hannah, watching all this, smiled and said that she was blonde after all. Then the girl with blonde hair finally approached him and turned to Lionel and asked who the girl was, pointing her finger at Hannah. She said there was simply no way he was dating that redneck. After saying those words, she laughed evilly. Lionel looked at the girl and replied in a cold voice to watch her words. He called her Dorya. Afterward he added, "So how did she know he was here?" Dorya said she heard the rumors of his arrival at this hotel spread right across the city. Then the fellow, remembering what the girl had said on entering, asked, "Is she really saying that he should marry her?" The girl pointed her finger at him and said that yes, he should do it. But Lionel was surprised and asked, "Why should I?" Then Dorya got angry and screamed all over the hotel that he had slept with her after all. Lionel understood now, and he said that it had been consensual. Hannah watched this and wondered if she should even listen to it. But the girl screamed and said that she would definitely admit it. But in the end, she got pregnant. Dorya said that it was therefore obvious that he was now going to be a father and should marry her. At that moment, Hannah realized that it was obviously time for her to leave, and with these thoughts she began to get up from the table. But then suddenly the girl reached her hand out to Hannah, asking where she was going. She even wanted to hit her, but halfway up her arm was intercepted by Lionel and turned to Mrs. Dorya Hamilton, said she had nothing to do with it, and if she had something to say, let her say it. The girl was outraged and screamed, asking if he had just addressed her informally. She was the one he always called only Miss or Mistress. Hannah was very uncomfortable about hearing all of this, and to some extent the conflict was also because of her. She wanted them to fight where she wasn't. Dorya asked if the guy should call her the same name himself. Lionel then asked if he did that, would the girl leave? Then she said after she killed that girl. But the boy interrupted her and addressed her by name and said that, as he had said, she could only complain to him. He was very stern. Dorya is outraged and says that this is simply not possible. After all, tigers are monogamous. She is carrying his child, and the girl doesn't understand the coldness on his part. Lionel said that if it was really his child, he would get married. But there was no way the baby could really be his. Hannah had already resigned herself to the fact that she would not be allowed to leave. She turned away from all these people and thought that this scene had gone on long enough. She felt embarrassed to even leave the room, because everyone would be paying attention to her.